with a net worth of $5.7 billion. He made his fortune when his pharmaceutical firm floated on the Shenzhen Stock Exchange last year. More familiar names from the Asia-Pacific include India's Lakshmi Mittal, chairman of ArcelorMittal, the world's biggest steel maker. He takes 6th place. In the West, it's the online world that's generating many of the new mega-rich. Facebook co-founder Mark Zuckerberg's wealth exploded by 238%. The heads of internet gaming site Zynga and online discounting firm Groupon have become two of the newest entrants. At the very top for the second year in a row is the Mexican telecom mogul Carlos Slim. He's widened the gap between himself and the next richest man, Microsoft's Bill Gates. But with the developing world growing as it is, it might not be too long before newcomers take the top spots. Azhar Sukri, Al Jazeera.
In the U.S. state of Wisconsin, the Senate has voted to remove nearly all collective bargaining rights held by public sector workers. The Republican-led legislation was opposed by 14 Democratic senators who fled to Illinois in protest. The proposed law is expected to be passed by the Republican-controlled state assembly on Thursday. You're watching Al Jazeera. Here are the stories making headlines. In the last half hour, Portugal has said it's cut its ties with the Gaddafi government. It comes as France announced it now recognizes the opposition National Council as the only legitimate representative of the Libyan people. Meanwhile, NATO defense ministers and EU foreign ministers are meeting in Brussels to discuss military options, including a proposed no-fly zone. That's ahead of a European Council summit on Friday, expected to toughen sanctions against the Gaddafi regime. And forces loyal to Gaddafi have launched new airstrikes on the oil town of Ras Ladouf a day after warplanes bombed oil installations there. Witnesses also say tanks are now approaching the town. The International Red Cross Committee says doctors in Libya have seen a sharp rise in casualties, and most of them are civilians. State television in Libya has broadcast what it says are confessions of members of a criminal terrorist group linked to al-Qaeda. Colonel Gaddafi has blamed al-Qaeda groups for starting the uprising in Libya. Yemen's President Ali Abdullah Saleh has proposed a new parliamentary system, and he's promised to prepare a constitution for referendum by the end of this year. But Yemen's opposition says people still want Saleh to step down.
When I spoke with the opposition about whether they are going to attend this gathering, they said, no, it's too late. Ali Abdullah Saleh stands for an old regime. He has to go. He has to understand that all the reforms that he is trying to offer are too little, too late.
The Dalai Lama has announced he'll be stepping down as political head of the exiled Tibetan movement. He says it's time for a freely elected leader to take over. China says the move is part of the Dalai Lama's plot to split the region.
The Dalai Lama is always a political figure in exile trying to split China in the long term in the name of religion. He's the leader of the Tibetan Independence Party, which is serving the independence of Tibet. In recent years, he has often claimed that he wanted to retire, but I think he's playing tricks with the international community.
An earthquake has hit a remote area of southwest China, killing at least 21 people and injuring more than 150 others. The epicenter of the 5.8 magnitude quake was southwest of Dali town in Yunnan province. Those are the latest headlines. The news continues here on Al Jazeera after Inside Story. Lots more details on all our stories on our website at aljazeera.net/English.
Muammar Gaddafi slams Western countries as they weigh the option of a no-fly zone over Libya and dismisses Libya's rebels as traitors. But as Gaddafi becomes increasingly isolated, what are his options? And as the standoff continues, would an international military intervention be the right solution? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Rida Fakhri. Calls are mounting for the imposition of a no-fly zone over Libya, but with no single nation willing to take the lead, What options lie ahead for Libya's future? Zainab AlJazeera has more.
They say it's from the sky that they are most vulnerable. And for Libyan rebels, UN resolutions and asset freezes are not enough. They are increasing their demand on the international community to establish a no-fly zone over Libya, a move supported by the British government, though with caution.
Work is going on in NATO on the contingency planning for this, so it is certainly a practical possibility. It has to have, though, the other factors that I was mentioning earlier. It has to have a clear legal base. It has to have the necessary international support, broad support in the region itself. Now, clearly, there are elements of those things there. In terms of, as I mentioned earlier, the statement of the GCC, and clearly the opposition forces in Libya itself have already called for a no-fly zone. So those things are practical, but the broad international support and legal base for it would also have to be there.
The White House, too, has made it clear they are considering their next move.
We've got NATO, as we speak, consulting in Brussels around a wide range of potential options, including potential military options, in response to the violence that continues to take place inside of Libya.
But this move would require military intervention, making it much easier to talk about than actually implement. And there is by no means unanimity among the UN Security Council, with both Russia and China insisting that Libyans must solve their own problems. So with Libya on the brink of civil war, what options lie ahead? For one thing, the recognition of the National Council, formed by rebel leaders, as a legitimate alternative ruling body in Libya would weaken Gaddafi's regime. France and the EU have already endorsed the National Council, and 2 members have met with French Foreign Minister Alain Juppé in Paris on Wednesday, and the EU Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton is also planning to meet them. But the European Parliament is split over what measures the EU should take to help the Libyan opposition, with rebel leaders calling for military assistance without direct military involvement. A solution to Libya's current crisis still seems a long way off. All the while, Muammar Gaddafi's forces will continue to try to take back areas now under rebel control, and the numbers of casualties will undoubtedly escalate. Zainab AlJazeera, Inside Story.
Well, for more on all this, we're joined now by our 3 guests from Texas. Mansour Al-Kikhya, the chairman of the Political Science Department of the University of Texas at San Antonio. From Washington, D.C., Henry Schuler, a former American diplomat who served in Benghazi in the early 1960s. Schuler was one of the few Americans to meet Gaddafi after the coup in 1970. And joining us here from Doha, Libyan political analyst Ibrahim Jibril. Welcome to you all to this edition of Inside Story. Ibrahim Jibril, as much of the world continues to debate what to do with the situation in Libya, the idea of a no-fly zone is gaining increasing traction, at least in some capitals. Do you see it as being in the long-term interest of Libya to have what will most likely be, in the end, a Western US-led military intervention?
Well, under the umbrella of the United Nations, and this is what we have been talking about all along, we have been clear that we're not asking for anyone